Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few really know what you are. Niccolò Machiavelli. The most dangerous manipulator is rarely the person everyone suspects. It is the person everyone defends, the helpful colleague, the devoted partner, the charming friend, the relative who is always so generous in public. They do not merely hide their behavior, they build an image so convincing that when you finally describe what happens behind closed doors, people question you instead of them. That is not accidental. Their innocence is not just a disguise, it is a weapon. Machiavelli understood a brutal fact about power long before modern psychology gave us language for manipulation. People judge what they can see. Very few gain access to what someone truly is. In The Prince, he was writing about rulers, reputation, and political survival, not diagnosing difficult partners or toxic colleagues. But the mechanism he described survives wherever appearances carry more influence than private truth. If someone controls what others see, they can make your reaction visible while keeping their provocation invisible. They can injure you in private, then use your public anger as evidence that you were the danger all along. This is how a manipulator turns reputation into an alibi. If you want to recognize power games before they begin shaping your choices, subscribe to MindWire. This channel is built to expose the hidden mechanism, not just describe the damage after it is done. The first thing to understand is that reputation and character are not the same thing. Character is what a person repeatedly does when there is no audience, no reward, and no risk of exposure. Reputation is what other people believe that person does. In a healthy life, the two remain reasonably close. In a manipulative life, they can be deliberately separated. Imagine a partner who is attentive at dinner with friends. They refill your glass, they praise your work, they tell a funny story about how much they admire your independence. Everyone leaves thinking you are lucky. In the car on the way home, the atmosphere changes. They criticize the way you spoke. They accuse you of embarrassing them. They interrogate you about a harmless conversation. By the time you reach home, the person who publicly celebrated your independence is punishing you for displaying it. The next day, you are distant. A friend notices and asks whether everything is all right. Before you answer, your partner smiles and says you are just tired. They put an arm around you. The gesture looks affectionate. To you, it feels like a warning. Stay inside the story I have already told. That is the appearance gap. One person lives in two realities. The public version creates admiration. The private version creates control. And because the public version has witnesses, it becomes easier for outsiders to believe. Most people assume that behavior reveals personality in a simple way. Someone who performs generous acts must be generous. Someone who speaks gently must be gentle. Someone who appears composed during conflict must be reasonable. But isolated acts do not reveal character unless you understand the conditions around them. A gift can express love. It can also purchase loyalty. Calmness can reflect emotional control. It can also reflect the advantage of the person who has already prepared the scene. This distinction matters because manipulators often invest heavily in visible virtues. They know which behaviors earn social credit. They help when help will be noticed. They apologize when the apology protects their image. They show patience in public because public patience gives them permission to be cruel in private. The performance does not need to be false every second. In fact, it works better when parts of it are sincere. A person can genuinely enjoy being generous and still use generosity to create debt. They can sincerely care about others and still punish anyone who threatens their control. That complexity is why intelligent people become trapped. They keep searching for a verdict on whether the person is completely good or completely bad. But power does not require total evil. It requires a repeated pattern in which one person's image matters more than another person's reality. Consider a manager who is known for mentoring younger employees. In meetings, he invites questions and says his door is always open. Senior leadership sees him as patient and supportive. But in private, he gives vague instructions, changes expectations after the work is finished, and humiliates employees who ask for clarification. When someone pushes back, he does not shout, he becomes disappointed. "I'm surprised you feel that way," he says. "I've done nothing but support you." The employee now faces two problems. The first is the manager's conduct. The second is the manager's reputation. Reporting the conduct means arguing against a public identity that powerful people already trust. The employee brings incidents. The manager brings an image. Incidents require explanation. An image feels immediately true. This is one reason reputation can defeat evidence. Evidence arrives as fragments, a message, a meeting, a phrase, a pattern of excluded opportunities. Reputation arrives as a complete story. The generous mentor, the patient spouse, the selfless parent, the loyal friend. Human minds prefer coherent stories to scattered details, especially when accepting the details would force us to revise our judgment. Machiavelli observed that the many see appearance while the few encounter reality. In modern life, the imbalance can be even stronger because appearance can be repeated at scale. A flattering social post reaches hundreds of people. A private insult reaches one. A public donation is photographed. A private threat leaves no witness. The visible act becomes part of the person's identity. The invisible act becomes your allegation. This does not mean every kind person is performing or every polished public image hides abuse. Suspicion without evidence is not discernment. The question is not whether someone looks good. The question is whether their goodness remains stable when there is no audience and when you are no longer useful to them. Watch what happens when you disagree. Watch what happens when you cannot repay the favor. Watch what happens when you receive attention they wanted. Watch what happens when you set a limit that costs them something. Conditions reveal motives. A virtue that exists only when rewarded is not a reliable virtue. It is a strategy. The manipulator's second advantage is selective visibility. They do not need to control every event. They only need to control which parts other people see. Think of an argument between friends. For months, one friend makes subtle jokes at the other's expense. The jokes are small enough to deny and sharp enough to wound. When confronted privately, the friend says, "You're too sensitive." At the next gathering, the pattern continues. A comment about money, a joke about a failed relationship, a story designed to make the target look foolish. The target finally snaps and says, "Why do you always need to humiliate me?" The room goes quiet. Everyone saw the outburst. Few noticed the accumulation. The manipulator raises their hands and says, "I was only joking." Now the visible moment belongs to the target, while the invisible history belongs to the manipulator. One looks aggressive, the other looks confused and innocent. This is provocation laundering. The manipulator creates pressure in forms that remain socially deniable, then waits for the target to express the pressure in a form everyone recognizes. The hidden aggression produces visible anger. The anger is then separated from its cause and presented as a personality flaw. You may have heard people say, "Look how calmly they are speaking, and look how emotional you are." But calmness does not determine truth. The person who designed the trap can remain calm because the scene is unfolding as planned. The person discovering the trap in real time may become emotional because their reality is being erased in front of an audience. Emotional control is valuable, but not because emotion makes you wrong. It is valuable because visible dysregulation can be edited into someone else's story. When dealing with an image-conscious manipulator, your reaction is not just a reaction, it is material. It can be quoted, recorded, described, and displayed without context. That is why the protective response begins before the confrontation. Do not wait until you are overwhelmed to decide how you will speak. Reduce the argument to observable behavior, dates, words, decisions, consequences. Replace "you always make me feel insane" with "you agreed to this on Monday, denied it on Wednesday, and changed the document on Thursday." The first sentence expresses a real experience. The second is harder to dissolve into a debate about your personality. This is not about becoming cold. It is about refusing to provide smoke when the truth needs light. The third mechanism is moral camouflage. Manipulators do not always present themselves as powerful. Often, they present themselves as exceptionally principled. They choose an identity that makes challenge feel immoral. In a family, this may be the parent who sacrificed everything. Every act of control is explained as concern. Every invasion of privacy becomes protection. Every demand for obedience becomes family loyalty. When the adult child asks for space, the parent does not discuss the request. They activate the identity. "After everything I have done for you." That sentence is powerful because it places the parent on moral high ground before the actual issue is examined. The conversation is no longer about repeated calls, unannounced visits, or private information shared with relatives. It becomes a trial of gratitude. If the child protects their privacy, they appear ungrateful. If they prove their gratitude through submission, the control continues. The public audience strengthens the camouflage. Extended family members know the sacrifices. They remember the school events, the financial help, the illnesses, the celebrations. They may not know how often help became leverage. So when conflict emerges, they defend the visible history and dismiss the invisible price. This is where many targets make a costly mistake. They try to destroy the manipulator's entire reputation. They collect every contradiction and attempt to convince everyone at once. But total exposure is rarely necessary, and it can make you look consumed by the conflict. You do not need the whole world to agree with you before you protect yourself. You need enough clarity to stop granting access that depends on your confusion. Some people will never understand because understanding would threaten their own relationship with the manipulator. A sibling who benefits from your role in the family may resist any truth that would force them to carry more responsibility. A colleague who receives protection from the manager may defend him because his reputation is useful. A friend who enjoys the charming public version may prefer that version to your uncomfortable account. Their disbelief is information. It tells you who is available for truth and who is invested in the performance. Machiavelli's insight was not that appearances are meaningless. It was that appearances are politically powerful because most people must judge from limited contact. In daily life, this means you should stop expecting casual observers to understand a pattern they have never experienced. Their ignorance does not invalidate your knowledge. But your knowledge must also be disciplined. The goal is not to replace blind trust with blind suspicion. The goal is to compare the public image with repeated private conduct. Ask 4 questions. Does the person's kindness survive disagreement? Does their generosity survive your refusal? Does their honesty survive consequences? Does their respect survive the absence of witnesses? If the answer repeatedly changes with the audience, you are not looking at stable character. You are looking at managed perception. Imagine a relationship in which one partner constantly praises the other online. Anniversary posts, thoughtful captions, photographs from carefully staged weekends. Friends comment that they are the perfect couple. Privately, however, affection is withdrawn as punishment. Money is monitored. Small mistakes trigger hours of criticism. The public posts become especially affectionate after the worst conflicts. The target begins to feel trapped by the photographs. Leaving would not only end the relationship, it would contradict a story that everyone has celebrated. They imagine the questions, but they adore you. They always speak so highly of you. We never saw anything wrong. Of course they did not see it. The image was built for them. This is the social proof trap. When many people believe someone is good, each person treats the belief of the others as additional evidence. No one wants to be the first to question the charming person. The target then mistakes consensus for knowledge. But 10 people who know the same public performance do not equal 1 person who knows the private pattern. The way out is not to compete through a more dramatic performance. It is to stop treating the audience as the judge of whether you may leave. You do not need a unanimous verdict to end access to your time, body, money, attention, or private life. Protection is not a courtroom sentence. It is a decision about exposure. This becomes especially important when the manipulator begins pre-emptive reputation management. They sense that you are pulling away, so they quietly prepare other people. They do not openly accuse you at first. They express concern. They have been under a lot of stress lately. I'm worried they're becoming isolated. I don't know why they are so angry, but I'm trying to be patient. These statements sound compassionate. That is why they work. They establish an interpretation before you speak. If you later describe mistreatment, your description is filtered through the story that you are unstable, stressed, isolated, or vindictive. The manipulator appears caring for tolerating you. Your attempt to correct the record becomes further proof that you are obsessed. This is not ordinary venting. Ordinary people may seek support when a relationship is difficult. The distinguishing feature is strategic consistency. The person presents themselves as reasonable, introduces doubts about your credibility, omits their own behavior, and recruits others to pressure you back into place. At work, this can happen before a performance review. A supervisor repeatedly blocks your resources, then tells leadership that you seem overwhelmed. They withhold information, then express concern about your missed details. They describe themselves as trying to help. By the time you present the operational problem, The room is already evaluating your emotional fitness. Your defense must be quieter than the trap. Keep records before you need them. Confirm decisions in writing. After a verbal meeting, send a neutral summary. To confirm, I will deliver X by Friday, and you will provide Y by Tuesday. Do not write as if you are building a criminal case. Write as a professional creating clarity. Documentation is strongest when it looks like what it is, a consistent record of reality. In personal relationships, the same principle applies with care. You do not need to record every conversation or live in permanent surveillance that can deepen anxiety and keep you psychologically attached to the conflict. Instead, preserve what matters. Save threatening messages. Write down major incidents while memory is fresh. Tell one trustworthy person concrete facts rather than only conclusions. They are manipulative, invites debate. They threaten to share private information if I left. Identifies behavior. Concrete language protects you from two dangers. It makes the pattern easier for credible people to understand, and it prevents you from exaggerating under stress. Accuracy is not a concession to the manipulator, it is your advantage. The fourth mechanism is borrowed virtue. A manipulator surrounds themselves with respected people, causes, and institutions so that credibility transfers to them. They volunteer, they mentor, they speak publicly about values. They form friendships with people whose approval functions like a character reference. Again, none of these acts proves manipulation. Good people do good things. The warning appears when visible virtue is used to cancel specific harm. I could never be controlling. I support women's rights. I cannot be dishonest. Everyone at church trusts me. I have helped so many people. Why would I exploit you? Notice the substitution. The person does not answer the behavior. They introduce unrelated evidence of goodness. But virtue is not a bank account where public deposits pay for private harm. A person can advocate compassion in one context and behave cruelly in another. Human beings are compartmentalized. The right question is never, have they ever done good? It is what happened here, and are they willing to face it honestly? A healthy person may feel defensive when confronted. They may explain context. They may disagree with your interpretation. But over time, they can remain connected to specific reality. They can say, I did that. I see the effect. Here is what I will change. An image-driven manipulator moves away from the event and toward identity. That is not who I am. Everyone knows me. No one else has ever accused me. They believe their reputation should overrule your experience. This is where Machiavelli's appearance principle becomes useful as self-defense. Do not argue about who they are. Identity debates have no finish line. Argue, if you must argue at all, about what access follows from what behavior. You do not need them to admit they are controlling before you end the conversation. You do not need them to accept the label dishonest before you stop relying on their promises. You do not need to prove they are a bad person before deciding they are unsafe for you. Move from verdicts to consequences. If they share private information, they receive less private information. If they insult you during conflict, the conversation ends when insults begin. If they change agreements, future agreements are written. If they retaliate against boundaries, access decreases. Consequences do not require consensus, they require consistency. The manipulator may accuse you of cruelty because consequences threaten the gap between appearance and reality. They want the social benefits of virtue without the private discipline virtue requires. Your boundary connects reputation back to conduct. That connection feels like an attack only to someone who depended on keeping them separate. There is another reason innocent appearances are powerful. Targets often participate in maintaining them, not because they are weak, but because exposing the truth carries costs. They do not want to embarrass the family. They do not want colleagues to lose confidence. They do not want friends to choose sides. They remember the person's good moments and fear being unfair. So they edit their own story. They say the argument was mutual when it was intimidation. They say the partner is stressed when the pattern has lasted years. They call humiliation a misunderstanding. They post the smiling photograph because explaining the silence would be harder. The manipulator learns from this protection. Every time you clean up the consequences, the public image becomes stronger and your private reality becomes lonelier. Breaking that pattern does not require a public campaign. It begins with refusing to lie on their behalf. You can be discreet without being deceptive. We are having serious problems and I'm not ready to discuss them. That decision was not mutual. I will not confirm a version of events that is untrue. These statements protect privacy without protecting the false image. The difference is crucial. Privacy keeps personal information contained. Secrecy forces you to carry another person's contradiction. In friendships, you may notice that the manipulator always needs a designated problem person, an ex who was crazy, a former friend who became jealous, a colleague who tried to sabotage them. At first, these stories make you feel trusted. Later, when you disagree, you become the next character in the same script. Pay attention to how someone describes people who are no longer useful to them. Do they acknowledge complexity? Do they admit their own contribution? Or does every story preserve their innocence and place all corruption outside them? A perfect victim history can be a reputation shield. It trains you to interpret future conflict before it occurs. You assume anyone who challenges them must belong to the long list of unstable enemies. Then one day, your name is added to the list, and the new audience hears about you exactly as you once heard about the others. The lesson is not to distrust anyone who has been hurt. Many people have genuinely survived repeated mistreatment. The signal is the absence of reflection combined with the repeated use of social recruitment. Pain seeks understanding. Manipulation seeks a jury. When someone brings every disagreement to an audience, ask what the audience is being used to do. Are they seeking perspective or collecting pressure? Are they open to being challenged or only to being confirmed? Do they protect private dignity or distribute selective details that make resistance socially expensive? The fifth mechanism is the conversion of your silence into their evidence. Because you do not want drama, you say nothing. Because they are speaking, their version becomes familiar. Familiarity begins to feel like truth. Months later, correcting the story feels like changing it. This is why strategic silence is different from frightened silence. Strategic silence means you choose not to argue with people who have no role in your decision. Frightened silence means you allow false claims to shape relationships that matter because you are afraid of appearing difficult. Choose the audience carefully. You do not owe everyone a defense. But where the outcome affects your safety, work, finances, children, or essential relationships, clarity matters. Speak early, briefly, and concretely. Do not drown the truth in every detail you have ever collected. Select the facts that reveal the pattern. State what happened, what evidence exists, what you need, and what you will do next. There is one more advantage the image-conscious manipulator often creates: false neutrality. They recruit someone who appears impartial, then quietly control the information that person receives. By the time you enter the conversation, the so-called mediator already accepts the manipulator's frame. Imagine two business partners. One repeatedly makes commitments to clients without consulting the other, then leaves the operational burden behind. When challenged, he contacts a mutual advisor first. He says he is worried that his partner has become rigid and negative. He shares carefully selected messages in which the partner sounds frustrated, but omits the promises that created the crisis. Later, he proposes a neutral meeting. The frustrated partner arrives, believing the meeting will examine broken agreements. Instead, the advisor begins by asking how both sides can improve communication. This sounds fair, but the language creates false symmetry. One person made unauthorized promises. The other became angry about carrying them. Treating both as equal communication failures hides the direction of cause and effect. False neutrality protects appearances because it converts specific conduct into shared tension. He lied about the money becomes, you both have trust issues. She threatened to expose private messages becomes, this relationship has become unhealthy. My supervisor changed the target after I met it becomes, expectations were unclear on both sides. Sometimes conflict truly is mutual, but neutrality becomes manipulation when it refuses to distinguish action from reaction, pattern from incident, and power from frustration. If you enter a mediated conversation, identify the question before discussing solutions. What specific event is being examined? What agreement existed? What changed? What evidence can both sides review? A solution built on a false diagnosis will protect the person who created the confusion. You must also be willing to leave a process that exists only to restore your compliance. A mediator is not neutral because they use a calm voice. Neutrality requires openness to evidence, equal standards, and freedom from hidden loyalty. If every fact you present is translated into your emotional problem, while every denial from the other person is treated as credible, the meeting is not resolving conflict. It is laundering the manipulator's reputation through a respected third party. This pattern appears in families when one relative becomes the peacekeeper. They tell you to apologize because you are the reasonable one. They do not ask the aggressor to change because the aggressor is difficult. The family calls this compromise, but the burden always moves toward the person least likely to retaliate. Your reasonableness becomes the resource used to preserve someone else's behavior. Real peace does not require one person to carry all the truth and all the consequences. Real reconciliation connects conduct to responsibility. When a system repeatedly asks you to absorb harm so the charming or volatile person can remain undisturbed, harmony is only the appearance, control is the reality. The strongest response to a controlled image is not a louder image. It is a reality that remains stable under examination. This also means accepting that you cannot control every opinion. The desire to make everyone understand can become a second prison. You leave the manipulator physically but remain psychologically attached to the audience, rehearsing arguments for people who have already chosen comfort over truth. Some will believe the charming version. Let that knowledge refine your circle. Credibility is not created by begging hostile people to grant it. It grows through consistent conduct, accurate speech, and relationships with people capable of revising their judgment. Your task is not to become better at performance than the performer. Your task is to stop confusing performance with power. Real power is being able to act without universal approval. It is the ability to remain measured when provoked, not because your anger is shameful, but because your future matters more than the scene. It is documenting what matters without making the conflict your identity. It is telling the truth without decorating it. It is ending access without waiting for a confession. Machiavelli wrote for a world of courts, rulers, alliances, and public reputation. We should not pretend that a Renaissance political manual maps perfectly onto a modern family, office, or relationship, but his observation remains sharp. What people appear to be can govern how others treat them, even when appearance and reality have separated. Once you understand that, innocence stops being something you judge from a smile, a calm voice, a generous act, or a crowd of admirers. You begin looking for continuity. Does the public kindness match the private conduct? Does the apology change the pattern? Does the principle survive inconvenience? Does the person remain respectful when you are no longer compliant? That is how you see beneath the image without becoming cynical. You do not assume everyone wears a disguise. You simply stop granting the disguise authority over repeated evidence. The next time someone tells you, "But they have always been wonderful to me," remember what that statement actually proves. It proves how the person behaves with them. It does not prove how the person behaves with you. Different people can receive different versions of the same individual, especially when power, usefulness, attraction, status, or secrecy changes the conditions. You are allowed to trust the version you repeatedly encounter. You are allowed to protect yourself before the audience understands. You are allowed to leave a performance without climbing onto the stage. And when a person's innocence depends on your silence, your confusion, and your willingness to absorb every private consequence, you are not looking at innocence. You are looking at a mask. If this gave language to a pattern you have seen, leave one word in the comments: mask.